Раз, два, три.
Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья, коллеги.
Good morning, dear friends, colleague. I am happy to see you. I will not take your time by long speeches. I will say just a few words and will give the floor to our experts. The topic of our meeting is the freedom of speech under the conditions of digital multipolarity. What is digital multipolarity? Is the today's situation when there is no single centralized control of internet and other digital resources. In the digital space, there are various companies, organizations, and states which take part in spreading and controlling the information. The main aspects of digital multipolarity include numerous stakeholders, platforms, and competition, and issues of influence, issues of privacy and safety. This is the situation which requires constant attention and adaptation from all stakeholders. What hazard does it bring to the freedom of speech? The sources can be blocked with following sanctions and criminal persecution. Creation of AI neural network and GPT chats which are aggressive against Russia and friendly countries. As a consequence, we can see various searches and arrests of journalists which cover the news honestly, but opposite to the Western narratives. Technologies of the 20th century make it possible to organize large-scale campaigns against them. Due to this campaign, they win minds and hearts of millions of people who live in the information vacuum of their states. As a consequence, we are risking to lose the freedom of speech, and this is not just single hazard and a risk. Journalists, activists, and public leaders from the BRICS countries will share their experience with us today, including Western countries. Now, I would like to pass the floor to an Australian activist, the founder of WikiLeaks, a father of Julian Assange, to John Shipton.
Is that my introduction?
It is, John.
Oh, so
your camera should be on.
Sorry?
Your camera.
I think the camera is on, but I'll just have to wing it by voice. But it's on. It's not.
We cannot see you.
Yeah, I've checked it several times.
No, we still cannot see you.
Well, I will have to wing it without vision. My computer is interfered with pretty regularly, just not by anybody other than silly people. So, I see the telephone in the possession of people and the smartphone as a distributed system, and the flaws in that distributed system is they're all gathered into a node, and that node can apply filters and it can make distinctions and distinguish between people and between what's being said by people. This is a terrible flaw in the system, but it's come about, in my view, in the West, because the power structures haven't been able or found themselves able to adapt to the digital age. In fact, what they have done is reinforced the power structures and suborned those scientists and that strata of genius that existed over the last 30 years. They've suborned their work into further control. Now, this has had another feature, and it's reduced considerably the avenues of life. Now, people, of course, use the phrase deindustrialization, but the phenomenon is the reduction of the avenues of life and the increase in discontent as the Western societies withdraw from their governments and become discontented. Consequently, what I first mentioned, the telephone in our hands, driven into gigantic tech companies, like, anyway, I won't mention their names, why bother with them, but driven into the hands of gigantic tech companies, which are hand in glove with the current power structures. This is a great problem for the West. Now, I'm told that what may happen is when Starlink gets over halfway, that's 15,000 satellites, that what will begin to happen is the telephones will beam straight to satellite and everybody will use a VPN to communicate with each other. But again, this seems to me to be a solution, a hopeful solution. So people have thought up this methodology and they think they can work around the way power has suborned and taken over the digital age. I see these all as problems, and I see that those problems go hand in hand with a decline in the efficacy of government in the West. They just go hand in hand, so that in the insecurity of states in the West is now profound. You can see it in anywhere, and its first manifestation was in COVID, and particularly in the state that I lived in, Australia, Victoria, where protesters about mandates or coercion were arrested or had rubber bullets fired at them. This is a problem that the people in the West themselves must address, and also take example from states like, the last point I'd like to make is that in each case, the use of the telephone and its communication capacity, in each case, it must be adjusted to suit the culture of the country that it is within. So, for example, China is very concerned with harmony, as it has to look after 1.4 billion people. And the casual approach of Western commentators and politicians to the administration of commenting upon the administration of China is just simply embarrassing. And equally, India, who has a theme of tolerance. And so that the use of the telephone and its powers and digitization must be adjusted. That's all I have to say, and thank you very much.
Thank you, John. И
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to a journalist from Brazil, active leader in struggling for a multipolar world, Pablo Escobar. Огромное
I wish I could be in Kazan, but unfortunately I have a lot of things to do here these next few days. I'm going to try to do something slightly different, which is grounded on my experience in journalism and the production of culture since the 1980s. Most of you were not even born at the time. So maybe we can tell a short story of the passage of the newspaper era to digitalization of everything, which goes in parallel with the marketization of everything, the marketization of life itself. So, coming back to what was happening in the early 80s. I started in journalism in the early 80s in a big newspaper, which in the second half of the 20th century, they were a mix of houses of wisdom, knowledge, production of culture, analysis, but very unilateral, because the newspapers, more or less, they printed the truth, according to them, of course. And they sold the idea that they were printing truth and selling truth to a large audience. when you start looking inside an enormous organization, big newspapers are enormous organizations, then you start to understand the motivations of the owners, of advertisers, the costs of running a newspaper like that, printing, the cost of printing, which is astounding, how you influence readers, and the power that you had at the time, because obviously, don't forget that at the time there was no alternative media. It was basically newspapers or, in most countries, the 8 o'clock news at night. Then you start to see how the industry works, and of course, how you are just a cog in a gigantic wheel and not necessarily turn towards a progressive outlook on life. For me, this was essential because when you start in journalism in a big newspaper and you see how the industry works, then later on you make your own choices to try to not to fight the industry, but to get out of the industry and work your own way, which is something that it took a long while from the 80s to the 90s. The transition was very slow. So when I started, for instance, a gigantic newsroom was basically an assembly line of typewriters. There were no computers. I think the computers arrived at our newsroom by 1983 to 1984. Clumsy, enormous, lots of cables hanging out from the ceiling, you know. And then, of course, the transition to fax. I became a foreign correspondent in 1985, and in the beginning was fascinating because we were still living like in the 50s or 60s. I had to use telexes to send my report. So I had to go to, for instance, in London, I used to go to an office in Victoria Street in London almost every day to telex my reports. Then we had something like it was a mix of electronic telex, but it was still, you still had to do everything by hand. And later on, of course, in the late 80s and 90s, the transition towards fax, and of course, the first mini portable computers, like the small Toshibas of the early, let's say the 1990s, the mid 1990s already. Uh, of course, at the time, the road towards digitalization was very, very, very slow. And it started to pick up really by the end of the millennium and the beginning of the 21st century. For instance, my transition from the big newspaper business to digital media was at the turn of the millennium. In fact, we were one of the first. It was a very small website based in Hong Kong, Asia Times, which before was a newspaper. And guess what? It collapsed. It collapsed because of the Asian financial crisis in 1997. They had huge debts in US dollars. It was a fantastic newspaper, but obviously it was not adapted to the way things were happening already. And well, starting in the new millennium, small websites like Asia Times in Hong Kong started to have a huge audience because we were doing exactly what mainstream media was not doing. For instance, the whole coverage of 9/11 and the post 9/11 era, which set the framework for the 21st century. Soon we had, lots of readers in the US that, wow, there's these crazy guys in a mini website in Hong Kong, and they're telling a completely different story. Don't forget at the time, there was no Twitter, no YouTube, no social networks, no nothing. So then some of us had the chance to make this transition from the big newspaper industry to go online in small websites and then later on in blogs, in many cases, blogs that started popping up, especially after 9/11 and especially in the US. So this was the transition that in the end culminated with the social network, with YouTube and the social network era, where we are now. And now everyone has the potentiality to be a citizen journalist just with a smartphone. And of course, all the pressures coming from the big digital conglomerates, most of them, practically all of them, are Silicon Valley, and the way they are trying to circumscribe the flow of information on the net. We are at the stage now that the net is going to become completely censored one way or another very, very soon by the Silicon Valley networks and the independents. The current case of Telegram, they're going to have to make a lot of concessions to, especially the case of Europe, where Europe is absolutely incapable of producing a social network, inventing a social network, or coordinating a social network. So they're trying to interfere with the others and trying to eventually even take over some of the others. They don't create, they regulate in the European Union, which is the meaning of the absolutely neo-Orwellian Digital Services Act. And in the case of, for instance, China, they went the Chinese way because their social networks and their digital environment is Chinese. And foreigners, okay, you can use VPN and have access to foreign information or foreign analysis. Let's put it this way, rules-based international order sort of analysis. But the absolute majority of hundreds of millions of netizens in China, they use Chinese networks. So now we are basically at a huge divide. The internet is going to be controlled, censored, regulated, interfered with all across the collective West. And we may have different networks for essentially Chinese, but eventually we could have a sort of BRICS organized social network, for instance, in the future, completely different from the domination of the West, and especially interference by the deep state, which basically interferes with all the Silicon Valley players. All the Silicon Valley players are deep state actors. Facebook, for instance, was a Pentagon project called LiveLeak. The day LiveLeak died, Facebook rose. Facebook was born, let's put it to say. So this is how it works. We all know that these are declinations of the deep state. The case of Telegram is very complicated, and we are just in the beginning of an enormous battle, because there will be efforts, especially by the Americans and the Europeans, to circumscribe Telegram and to start interfering Telegram and having backdoors. And okay, I know maybe I have 1 minute left. Is that it? So
I've tried to.
Yes,
tried
Pepper, please, time.
okay, 1 minute left.
Yeah,
So
that happens
where we are
occasionally.
now is that at least we have
I'll try again.
an enormous array of citizen journalists all across the global majority who can make an impact and make a difference using their voices and especially their experience online, and be followed, admired, and at least installing agoras, like in ancient Greece, of discussion in certain niches of the net. For the moment, is the best that all of us can do, because the pressure coming from the enormous conglomerates and the deep state especially, it's only going to increase. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Pepe.
Thank you.
И я передаю слово.
Thank you. And I'm passing the word to journalist, a geopolitical analyst from USA, Ferrello Isabel Mallorca.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening here and being here today. We've entered this age today where we are facing these two paradigms. We're facing the old order of the unilateral world and the multipolar world, which means basically a world focused on cooperation and the respect of national sovereignty. And it doesn't necessarily mean everybody will agree with everything. But for the longest time, for the last 50 years or so, and even before that, We have seen the world be dominated by the United States and its allies. The United States became the new empire after the fall of the British Empire and Europe. And we have seen this dominance come in the form of the biggest and most destructive hegemon, which is the United States. And I can say that very well because I know right now the United States is persecuting journalists, it's persecuting dissidents, it's going after people for simply having a different opinion. This administration has been among the worst. Once the Democratic Party used to be the party of the people, the party of freedom, the party of being able to disagree, and of course that's no longer the case. However, the United States has a uniparty, and it's very, very hard for anything else to break through. We have seen, and I have seen myself in going to all these countries in Iran, Russia, I was just in Iraq, I've been all over Latin America, and I have seen what regime change operations have done to the global south, what sanctions have done, what many of these things that the United States says are in the form of humanitarian aid have done. The reality is this is, of course, all in an effort to control, in an effort to continue expanding. And unfortunately for us in the West, which is, I mean, this isn't something I'm necessarily glad for the people in my life and in the United States, but this has been a long time coming. The United States is no longer in that facet of being the most powerful leader. We have seen the emergence of Russia and the emergence of China, and this will be shown, of course, in the BRICS summit happening very soon here. Now, it's funny that we mention elections because we have seen that the United States has said that Russia is interfering in elections for the third time now, since 2016. I've been hearing this, of course, and I would hope that if Russia had anything to do with election interference, which there hasn't been any evidence of that thus far, it would give us better choices than the ones presented before us right now. Because the American people right now are at a standstill when it comes to our politics. And right now, because of everything I just mentioned, like I said, there's this massive censorship. We have seen YouTube channels taken down, any of these channels mentioning pro-Russian views or views against what is happening in Gaza by Israel, the genocide that is happening. Much like the United States has said that they lead with democracy, we have known to have this idea of freedom of speech. And this idea of freedom of speech is supposed to be the number one thing we believe in. But right now, that's actually not the case. We have seen the persecution of journalists in the form of now attacking RT, attacking Russia Today, attacking any sort of Russian channels, Russian media, saying that they are promoting an influence in the US elections when the reality is nobody influences our government more than Israel has at this point. And now we have a case in the United States where there are several radical black socialist activists, and they are part of this group called the Uhuru Group, and they are facing 20 years in jail for simply having a say and saying, hey, we don't believe we should be involved in the Ukraine war. We don't believe that what's happening is just. And we have also seen the FBI raid people's homes in the United States and in the UK. In the United States, of course, we saw Scott Ritter have his home raided. We have also seen the UK raid the home of activist Sarah Jacobson, I believe is her name. And of course, this is not normal, but it's become a normal in the United States. It's become something that now what everybody's telling me is you need to go home, that you're in danger, all of these things that have changed my life as a journalist that has ventured into areas where I was told not to go. And I came to Russia, and I go to these places because I want to see what's actually happening, and I want to see what is the truth. And so, as we know, last night, Ukraine unleashed a series of drone attacks, 14 of these UAVs in Ramanskoye in the Moscow region. And in doing this, they killed a woman and they injured several others, almost killed a child. You will not see this reported in the media. You will see somehow that Russia is to blame for this. The same way you don't see this, you saw in Western media try to justify the onslaught that's happening in the West Bank, that's happening in Gaza, the same way that the United States justifies these actions for its allies. And, this is something that Julian Assange fought for, right? This is something that we have seen has been the repercussions and the stamp of the United States. 20 years after the war in Iraq, we have reemerged with Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris, and it's just laughable, and it's really also sad. We have this man that was completely complicit in what we did in Iraq and all over. When we're talking about waterboarding, we're talking about the illegal surveillance of the American public. All of these things have just been building up to this point. And what I will say, though, is that I recently spoke to the economist, he's world-renowned, Richard Wolff, and he told me that the United States is an empire in decline. There is no way out of it. Right now, what we're seeing is denial. We're seeing a denial of what has already transpired. And that denial is what you're seeing now. The outlashing, just in denial that we're falling apart. And even though we came from here after the Second World War, we're going this way, whereas Russia, China, and others are going up. And it may be hard for people to see that, but I can tell you when I go back home, I see that decadence. And unfortunately, that is something that we in the United States will have to deal with. But as journalists, as political commentators, as whatever people are, as dissidents, we cannot be afraid, we cannot be told that we need to stay silent. We need to do the opposite and utilize these new social media platforms, even when they censor us. Find different ways to get the message across. What I've been experimenting on is using short form of videos, using abilities to circumvent these censorship methods, because I was also taken off YouTube, and so have many of my other colleagues here. And I've also been completely shadow banned in many cases, but that cannot stop you from having these conversations, from coming to places like this. And that is definitely my suggestion, and in focusing on the youth, because younger people, Gen Z, as we call them in the US, they know these mediums. They were born knowing them more than us millennials. And I think that we really do need to focus on finding ways to get the information out there in ways that are very easy to digest, and really find ways to tell our side of the story, which, you know what, at the end of the day, I think the United States is a country that had so many things going for it, but right now it's very difficult to say that it is doing anything courageously, as many of us, including myself, fear going to the United States because we might be persecuted for X or Y reason, and that's not going to stop me from telling the truth. And I urge all of you to know here in Russia that there are many of us who feel this way, who support that you have your point of view heard, that you have your story, your narrative heard, and that we support simply telling the truth. And that is why many of us pursue this career. And so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fiorella. Я попрошу сейчас вывести еще раз Джона Шиптона, отца Джулиана.
Now I would invite John Shipton to be put on screen, the father of Julian Assange, who has reconnected. I wonder if he would be able to see me as a chairwoman of this plenary. Can we please have the video of John? Yes, thank you very much. We do see you, sir. Sir, we are having an award, BRICS Voice of the World. Voice of Peace. I would like to award this to John Shipton, the Australian activist, the creator of WikiLeaks, the father of Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, for the honesty and for persistence. This award would be heading to Australia.
Так,
You've been given an award from the BRICS Journalists Association.
John.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, John.
Your mic is muted now, John.
Yeah, first we have no picture, now we have no sound.
I turned it
go.
off because the phone kept ringing.
Oh, we can hear you, John.
Thank you. I just wish to say thanks. Some years ago, I was contacted by the Journalist Association in Russia and for a gift to Julian of an award. And the award included some money, which Julian donated to those journalists' families who had been murdered. So thank you again for this second.
Thank you, John. Thank you. И сейчас я хочу передать слово общественному...
And now I'd like to pass the word to Australian blogger, community activist, persecuted by Australian authorities for the freedom of choice, who is now living the second year in a row in the Russian embassy in Sydney. The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has awarded the gentleman the citizenship of Russian Federation. So from the Russian Federation embassy of in Sydney, with us is Myan Boykov.
Easier to understand for our audience. It's great to see everybody. It's great to speak alongside John Shipton, a fellow Australian, and everybody else that's here today. Thank you very much for the invitation. Look, when it comes to freedom of speech, there are definitely massive risks, as we all know. And one of the greatest examples of in our time of a battle for freedom of speech was that battle which John Shipton conducted on behalf of his son. But in a way, we are all fighting for freedom of speech along those lines, and there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees. If you compromise on your freedom of speech, you can get a guarantee. If you make a deal with the devil, or you make a deal with big tech, you make a deal with the social media, not to say certain things or not to mention keywords, then you're safe. Then you do have a guarantee. Now, if you want to say the truth and you want to stick to the truth and you want to peddle the truth, it's very dangerous. It's very risky indeed. I myself have been, as the host has indicated, holed up in the Russian consulate in Sydney for the last 650 days by my choice. Yes, it's difficult to be locked up in a building. However, being locked up in the Russian consulate, I have absolute free reign on freedom of speech. There is nothing that the Russians will tell me not to say or to say. And for that, I'm very thankful to the Russian president for citizenship and for the fact that I can be here. It's just simply, in Western countries such as Australia, it's just simply too risky. There are a lot of risks and no guarantee, unless, of course, you're willing to make a deal, willing to not say certain things, willing to not speak about certain topics. In Australia, we have suppression orders on certain topics. People go to jail for mentioning names, for breaching suppression orders. I was sentenced to 10 months jail, in fact, in maximum security. And once I was put into prison, I was labelled as a national security interest. So the Australian government has a poor record on freedom of speech, persecuting journalists. And it's my wish, my dream, is that I could leave Australia and go straight to Russia. And hopefully that's being worked on in the background. But in the meantime, we are fighting a global war for freedom of speech. Journalists all around the world are under attack if they are against the narrative, if they're against the establishment. And on that note, there are many good people in the world who have been terrorized and persecuted by big tech at the behest of big government. Demonetized, thrown off platforms, suspended, cancelled, banned, including people, colleagues that today talking at this forum. And it's my wish or recommendation or suggestion that there should be perhaps a non-government entity, non-government Russian entity, or not necessarily even Russian, but at least closely aligned with Russia, maybe for jurisdictional purposes it could be outside of Russia, but an entity which could pick up the pieces, where journalists who have been censored for medical misinformation, for calling out the COVID vaccines or criticizing aspects of Western government policy, whatever it may be, that they're being censored for, where they can appeal to and have their monetization and have their rights reinstated or restored, at least to that par that they were on before. And what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. The multipolar world, BRICS, should pick up the pieces and should take the initiative in scooping up all of this talent that's out there. Plenty of talent in the world. And we know that there are plenty of cogs and nuts and bolts of the big government machine, to quote Joseph Stalin, who are working and doing their job in the background, not because they've been told to, but because they know it's the right thing to do. And in the context of the special military operation, there are many people, let's call them little guys, men, women, mums and dads, young people all around the world who have not been asked by the Russian government, who have not been asked by a Russian entity. And they're doing, as volunteers, a great job. And these people, all I can say is I'm certain that these people will be recognized after Russia's victorious. Russia's busy at the moment, but these people should be recognized. And let's just say thank you to all the people out there all over the world of different nationalities from different countries who are holding the line and are fighting the informational war, defending freedom of speech and giving the multipolar world a voice. Because look, the entities, the government agencies who are against the multipolar world, I'm talking namely about those from Washington, they have almost unlimited resources. For example, Russian dissidents who left at the beginning of the special operation.
Семен, простите, у нас, правда, очень ограничено время, что перебивать.
I am sorry, we're really pressed for time. Oh, I have not named the shooting lists yet. Okay, let's not speak about shooting lists. Let's have it finished and pass the floor further. It is very interesting to listen to you, but unfortunately we're pressed for time. There are a lot of people to take the floor. Thank you. Would you say anything in conclusion? In conclusion, we will win. We are working brothers.
Спасибо большое, Семен. Держи.
Thank you very much. Be brave. Hope to see you soon. Now I would like to pass the floor to a journalist, from a geopolitical analyst from the Netherlands, Sonja van den Ende, who is persecuted by her country for her work for covering a special military operation and referendum in Donbass as an independent observer. Sonja, the floor is yours.
Well, welcome all. Thank you for listening to us here. Well, as you know, as you heard from all my colleagues here on screen and who are sitting here, we are sanctioned journalists in the West. But this forum is about digitalization. So I would like to say a few things about that. I was always a little bit suspicious about, well, digitalization, no, but artificial intelligence, yes. We all hear stories, and that is mainly from the Western world, that okay, your job as a journalist will be finished because, you know, it will be taken over by artificial intelligence. Well, I do not agree with that because, as we know, in the Western world, the media is like, copying articles from each other. So I call them administrators. I don't call them journalists. I think the role of a real journalist is to go out in the field, to see what is really happening and write down your own truth. This is what journalism is. So they can speak about digitalization of journalism or artificial intelligence. I mean, this is just an illusion, I think, from the Western world. I think digitalization is very good. I mean, like we journalists, we write articles, and in the early days you should go to somehow an office, give your article. Now you do it online. So that's a big plus, I think. And you can use your social media, even though you are sanctioned in a lot of social media. But still, we can use social media. We can use the Russian social media, the Chinese, and we can find ways to put our articles in the West. But I think the real danger for the job of journalism is what I said. It's in maybe the bloggers, it's in the vloggers, the YouTubers, because they are only... a certain point of journalism is what they are doing, but we are, I think, the real journalists, although the West calls us propagandists, but I don't agree with that because, you know, I saw too many things in my life about writing the truth and what we are doing. I think the role for Russia is to use artificial intelligence and to use digitalization, but use it in a very good way, because what my colleagues also said, we are now going to the multipolar world, so we can use our digitalization in the multipolar world. We don't need the West for this. We need the West only to spread our articles for the truth, and this we can do somehow with VPNs. This is also a big plus from digitalization. But it's up to the youth here, I think, in Russia and the other countries to show that Russia is good in artificial intelligence and digitalization, that we, in the future, well, maybe they become better. We see the Chinese already. They are, I think, very far in digitalization and artificial intelligence. The big thing with artificial intelligence is, of course, the wars we see now. We see here in Russia, we see the drones coming already. We have like a drone war. Also robotization, this is very dangerous because, well, when they shoot a drone somewhere, does the drone or the robot knows that this is a child or this is some, you know, an enemy? So this is a real danger. And I think they need to have more, they have to speak about this more, that we have to use it good, because we cannot stop artificial intelligence. It's there already. We see it everywhere, when we pay with our money, when our jobs as a journalist. So, but we need to work with it in a clever way, not let it overrun your life and not let it overrun our jobs, because people need to work, need to do their profession. And this is, I think, the big danger. The West is, in my opinion, a little bit crazy. They say that a lot of jobs are gone and people sitting at home now, and some crazy idiots, I call them, tell you, people will now sit at home, use drugs and computer games. This is totally ridiculous. This is what the World Economic Forum guy says. But what I say again, we need to use artificial intelligence and digitalization, especially in our jobs, journalism, in a very good way. But we still need to do the field work as a journalist. We need to go out, get the truth out, but use these tools very good. And then I think this is the role of a journalist, to use artificial intelligence and digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Totally agree with you. Those are the good tools for the journalism. And сейчас я передаю слово.
Now I'm passing the floor to Shea Bolso, a correspondent from RT from Ireland. Shea discovered the corruption of the previous Prime Minister of Ireland. Hi, friends and colleagues, Simeon, Mira. Good morning. My Russian is not very good. I still learn it. I will pass to English.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for asking me to speak. Great to see everybody gathered in Kazan. It's a city I love very much. I've been there many times. Beautiful place, wonderful people. And it's just part of this fabric of the wonderful country that Russia is. And it's a country that I think it's very important that us Western journalists and people in the West has given an umbrella of protection and support to. And that's something I want to talk about today. Aside from a digitalization of social media and journalism, which I think is exceptionally important, I suppose what propelled me into notoriety in my own country was an online platform, an investigative journalism platform, which I and several friends began to look into petty corruption in Irish politics and policy. And as a result of that small group of people, there's only 3 or 4 of us involved in it initially, it led to significant impacts in Irish life. Several government ministers have been, charged. One individual has been sent to prison, the guy in charge of Ireland's planning authority, and Ireland's housing sector is in absolute crisis, as we know. So what I want to talk about is the capacity for individuals to make a difference and how to maybe use the vast scale of social media now. Over 5.5 billion people use social media on Earth every day, and the scale of that is just immense. And the countries that are using it most are countries like China, India, Russia, as people turn away from mainstream media. They realize and they lose trust in this centralized peddled narrative, which we in Russia and we voices of dissent who've come to Russia to work and to tell the truth about Russia and tell the story of Russia in the West, we understand how aggressively that voice is oppressed and suppressed, and how important it is for us to understand the network of social media and how to use it. I mean, before I came on here, I decided to look at my own social media footprint over the last year, and I was astounded to see that over 320 million people had read and looked at my work on X alone, on Twitter alone. And that just astounded me. That it scares me in many ways, and it makes you realize the responsibility we have to try and tell the truth, which we do here in RT, particularly as RT is sanctioned, as colleagues and friends of mine in RT are named in these ludicrous State Department and Treasury Department attacks on individuals. I mean, the reality is, and I would say this to everybody here, the reason they are frightened of us isn't because we're lying. The reason they're frightened of us is because we're telling the truth. And it's the same with all big machines and the big media machines, which are client media organizations of the same people who are funding the uniparty state in the United States. In Britain, we've got a clampdown on freedom of speech from apparently a socialist government under Keir Starmer. So I think it's really important that we understand the importance of maintaining that integrity while the opposition and the people who would seek to close us down completely disregard this integrity. And we're very honored to have probably the greatest journalist alive's father with us, John Shipton. And his son has given us a very high bar. So whatever troubles we're put under, I myself am on a kill list by the Ukrainian secret services. I've been called a dangerous subversive by my own prime minister in the parliament. The British, Ukrainian and EU ambassadors held a meeting in my own home city and put a picture of me on the wall and said I was the biggest threat to freedom of speech in my own country. None of this matters when you see what Julian Assange went through and refused to bend his knee for all of that time. So I think we're honored to have his father here with us. But I think the key point in digitalization for me is that we do have access to these platforms. And I think we should be coming together more often in forums like this to understand the fabric of that. How do we exploit it in our own benefit? Because this machine that's arranged against us is very well funded. It's a billion dollar machine, which is using huge farms of influence to try to undermine people like us who are doing our best to tell the truth. So I'd like to congratulate you all as well for maintaining that determination to tell the truth, because it's something that it's non-negotiable. And once you set out on the path of telling the truth, there's very little way you can turn around. It's a very narrow path. So we have to go on. Будет победа за нами. Здравствуйте. Спасибо большое.
Спасибо, Shay. Thank you so much. And guys, we have only 33 minutes left, 6 speakers, so let's respect the time of each other and be short with our statements. Следующий выступает...
The next speaker is Uday Singh, the independent journalist from India. Всем привет, очень рад быть здесь, в Казани, прекрасный город. Я хотел бы начать, вернее, с того, чем закончил мой друг Чейн. Против нас работает огромная машина, и самый большой инструмент, которым обладает эта машина, это искусственный интеллект. Это более опасно, чем вы думаете. И я хочу рассказать вам о канале YouTube, который...
The Russian military-industrial complex. We used to go to the factories, we used to see how the BMPs, the tanks, the fighter jets, everything, how they're made. And basically we were showing the world how the sanctions really haven't affected the military-industrial complex at all. So why does artificial intelligence play a negative role in all of this? So, I mean, most of my colleagues here would agree that when you're on a mainstream platform like YouTube, you have to be very careful of what you say. If you say the wrong word, your channel is under threat. And how does YouTube, Meta, and all these companies actually monitor what you're saying. There's no like a group of people or monitors that are, you know, watching millions and millions of videos. What they're doing is they're using artificial intelligence to monitor the waves. And if anyone says the wrong word that is against the mainstream narrative, because let's be honest, we are using mainstream platforms to put out information that we think or that we know is right and is the truth, but not many people like it. So they use artificial intelligence to find out who we are, what we're saying, and of course, suppress those instances of truth. So I do believe that artificial intelligence is, needs to be capped, especially when it comes to big media companies, Meta, Facebook, etc. They shouldn't be allowed to use artificial intelligence because that just allows for them to en masse monitor and suppress free speech, even though they pretend to be the bastions of free speech. I mean, in India we had the largest elections in the world. And that's a testament to the democracy that India is, despite whatever you might hear in the West, oh, India is, you know, suppressing that, repressing that. Every country has its, you know, faults. But at the same time, you have to understand that the Indian elections were a testament to our democracy. I mean, and Facebook and Meta played a huge role in that. Mobilization of voters, you know, holding of rallies, etc. And there were many instances that I saw that Facebook was suppressing posts that were telling the truth of what's happening. Not just telling the truth, but exposing or spreading misinformation about, oh, look, this is an instance of whatever. So I mean, I don't want to go into the details of all of that, but at the same time, these are very powerful platforms, and they're using artificial intelligence as a tool for mass control and mass surveillance. And of course, I would like to end the speech by saying that artificial intelligence needs to be capped. Thank you.
Thank you, Uday. И слово передаю.
Thank you, Mr. Uday. I'm passing the word to journalist, military expert, an expert, co-chairman of BRICS Journalists, that has association that has organized today's roundtable, today's event in this very session, representative of Brazil, Lucas Leiros.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'd like to be in Kazan in person, but unfortunately it wasn't possible this time. It's an honor for me to see the BRICS Journalists Association participating in such an important event. And well, I will make a very short statement on how digital sovereignties should be pursued in order to achieve the full establishment of a multipolar world. As we know, we're currently living in a process of geopolitical transition. The old geopolitical order based on Western hegemony and unilateral imposition of interests by the United States and its allies is now being replaced by a more polycentric system based on the diversity of regional powers and multilateral cooperation. And in parallel with the geopolitical change, there is a scenario of advanced technological development. New digital technologies bring with them improvements and challenges to the new geopolitical scenario, and more especially to the way of dealing with this geopolitical transition. For many years, the Western countries believed that they could maintain control over technological progress with political, military, and economic hegemony. Western countries were able to do absolutely anything to prevent emerging nations from reaching a high level of technological development. In the new geopolitical reality, Western powers are increasingly less able to intervene against the technological development of emerging nations. And thanks to multilateral cooperation with technologically advanced regional powers, more and more countries remain technologically independent from the West, bringing great strategic benefits to their people. However, the challenge is far from over. In the current scenario, Western countries still maintain global, not absolutely global, but when they maintain big control over the technological structures of many emerging nations. And they have the ability to intervene and to sabotage the regional development process of many countries. So global hegemony, global technology companies, which are most of them based in former hegemonic powers, are now acting together with state services to create a kind of anti-multipolar coalition, trying to use technology against multipolarity. So, as a journalist myself, I must emphasize that many of these coordinated attacks by public-private groups against digital multipolarity occur precisely in the information arena. Big price and big tech giants are constantly mobilized by Western state services to attack alternative sources of information in a joint effort by the West to weaponize information against the national sovereignty and geopolitical multipolarity. So, aiming to this scenario, a common agenda for digital sovereignty must be established among non-Western countries to seek to create a multipolar world. Just as private companies and state actors in the West work together to harm emerging nations, a multipolar public-private technology alliance must be established under the principle that each country's technological progress benefits international society and humanity as a whole. But the West has for many years used the technology against all the peoples of the world. And it is our duty now, at the dawn of multipolarity, to use technology in favor of the freedom of all the peoples. So I'd like to emphasize our multipolar digital agenda is necessary for the creation of a multipolar world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lucas. Сейчас передаю слово.
Now I'm passing the floor to geopolitical and strategic analyst, blogger from France, Cyril Delattre.
Morning, everyone. I'll try to be quick. What I'm going to say, you have to see this through the eyes of a geopolitical strategist and military analyst, not from a journalist. We're living in an era marked by profound technological and political upheavals. In this context of digital multipolarity, it is crucial to focus on the fundamental principle of any democratic society, freedom of speech. This is a sacred right protected by documents like the American Constitution, normally, and the French Constitution, normally also. However, in a world increasingly dominated by digital platforms and large tech companies, this freedom, once considered absolute, is now being challenged. Let's begin by discussing the American Constitution, whose historical significance in protecting freedom of speech up to a certain time has been undeniable. Although sometimes heavily scrutinized, as we saw during the COVID crisis on Facebook and with the special operations in Ukraine. The First Amendment states, Congress shall not make no laws respecting an establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. This clause prevents the federal government, normally, from directly intervening in public discourse, a principle that allows for often heated, sometimes even conflicting debates. Of course, there is a downside, especially in the context of propaganda, which Americans so dearly love, whether it's about LGBT issues or in the case of the special operations in Ukraine. Propaganda through the press that sometimes amounts to a straightforward rewriting of history. Across the Atlantic, the Declaration of the Right of Man and of the Citizens of 1789, enriched in the preamble of the French Constitution, also guarantees this right. That's the Article 11. The free communication of citizens may accordingly speak, write, and print freely, except in cases provided by law, where the abuse of this freedom is punishable. And here is a subtle but important difference compared to the American model. Freedom of speech in France is framed by legal boundaries. This leads to restrictions, and since there are often no clear laws on the subject, it allows for interpretation that can result in an arbitrary decision, particularly when President Macron's regime seeks to restrict speech or simply curb the freedom of expression. The arrest of Pavel Durov is a striking example, although in this case it's not just about freedom of speech, but also likely about controlling Telegram cryptocurrency or preventing the dissemination of information the West doesn't want to make public. To counter the free speech, we've seen the rise of so-called fact-checkers, some of whom are directly owned by the very same GAFA, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Meta, whatever you want to call them, as well as new terms to categorize people who do not share the dominant narrative: conspiracy theorists, anti-vaxxers, and pro-Russians. Take Facebook, for instance, one of the most influential platforms in its time in the world. Zuckerberg, its founder and CEO, admitted to bowing to political pressure, notably from the US government to remove certain content deemed harmful during the COVID crisis. The state interference clearly shows that governments haven't relinquished their influence over the public discourse. This represents a new, more insidious form of censorship, where the state delegates part of its power to maintain social order and control discourse. You can even imagine what the French press is capable of writing regarding the special operations in Ukraine. Joseph Goebbels would look like a third-rate amateur by comparison. We're seeing the same trend on LinkedIn, professional platform that, while more discreet, is not immune to these dynamics. Moderation algorithms designed to filter inappropriate speech have become so important that some content gets rejected before it's even published. This is an example of algorithmic pre-censorship, where user posts are automatically scrutinized based on criteria defined by the platform itself, and in some cases by state. On X, formerly known as Twitter, things have recently taken an interesting turn. Musk, who acquired the platform with a promise of a more freedom of speech, faced a major challenge recently from the head of the European Ministry of Thought, Thierry Breton. The European Union, through laws like the Digital Service Act, now imposes strict rules on digital platforms to control online discourse under the guise of fighting so-called disinformation. While Elon Musk has tried to resist these attempts, sometimes responding quite colorfully to European authorities, it's evident that political pressures on these platforms are only increasing. This is the universe dominated by GAFA, and in this universe there is one player still resisting, unlike other platforms. Pavel Durov and his brother, the creators of Telegram, have consistently refused to give in to Western governments' demands for censorship and control, while still agreeing to share certain information to combat terrorism, for example, as French services such as DGSI or DGSE, which is the equivalent of the FSB SVR, had communication channel with Durov. The charges then against him do not hold anymore, unless there is an attempt to pressure him into providing what all the others have given so far, backdoors that allows almost total control of the platform by the CIA, NSA, MI6, or others. Ironically, Pavel was not arrested by the so-called evil Russia, but by France, the land of human rights and freedoms on order of the United States of America. But this freedom comes at a price. This context pushes us to think more deeply. In France, freedom of speech has in many cases become a legal matter. Arrests are multiplying for the same so-called disinformation, or worse, in my case, for reinformation. It seems this fundamental risk is being reduced to a battle between those who seek to protect it and those who want to limit it under the banner of fighting what they call disinformation, which is really just Western groupthink. Ladies and gentlemen, the real question we must ask ourselves is this one: how much longer will we be able to defend this space of freedom before they are entirely absorbed by the interest of those who don't want us to be able to think for ourselves, to educate for ourselves, and thus to gain the knowledge that allows us to challenge their narrative and their agenda. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Cyril.
Thank you very much, Cyril. And now I'm passing the floor to our colleague journalist from Italy, editor of Don Bastali, Vincenzo La Russo. Good morning. I'm not speaking good Russian, thus I would be speaking English, please. So sorry.
Good morning to everybody. Greetings from my wonderful city, Lugansk. I would like to talk about the problem of the terrible propaganda present in the Italian mass media. Propaganda that causes a huge amount of fake news. Some really absurd that will probably make you smile, others that will make you angry. I remember in the first days of the special operation, when on the Italian first channel, Rai, like us, Pervi Canal Verassia, were shown the videos of the bombings on Kiev. But these images were completely fake and came from a video game. When a few days later, a spectator called Rai and recorded the phone call, the person who had broadcast the image of the video game justified himself by saying that it was Russia's fault. Why Russia's fault? Because they didn't send the image of the bombings. In March 2022, the newspaper La Stampa reporting on the bombings in Kiev with the headline Carnage, but the photo was a man who had lost his wife during the Ukrainian bombing in Donetsk. Recently, there was a big scandal because an Italian correspondent of Rai who interviewed a Ukrainian Nazi who was wearing a hat with a symbol of SS. The journalists tried to hidden the hat, but fortunately or unfortunately, not very well. But in Italy, the mass media continue to say that there is no Nazis problem in the Ukraine. In fact, they are partially right. There is no Nazi problem in Ukraine because fundamentally in Ukraine is not a problem to be a Nazi. Also on Rai, the number one of the journalists, Bruno Vespa, of the first Italian channel, Rai, stated that the invasion of Kursk took place without killing any civilians and without destroying any homes in Kursk. I believe it's fundamentally important to arrange a task force that deals with disinformation in their countries, that denounce this fake news. The sort of team of foreign journalists, Italian, Brazilian, Dutch, French, American, and others, that can monitor the fake news that come from their country and like a team to be able to counter NATO propaganda. But it's very important that the Russian social media, like YouTube, like Zen, Contact, will open to international audience with a possibility to approach with English version, French version, and every language is possible. This is because we don't have weapons to contrast the NATO propaganda. Zelensky asked to the Europe, to the West, weapons. We are journalists. We are bloggers. We don't have these weapons. The weapons is social media, free social media like YouTube, like Zen, like Contact. But we need that this social media approach to international audience. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Винченцо. И я передаю слово.
Thank you, Vincenzo, and I'm passing the floor to international human rights supporter, BRICS AI expert, Mr. Melnikov Ivan Vladimirovich. Sir, I'm the director of BRICS Agency on AI. I will speak briefly about what AI is, what positive and what threats it has. AI has a great potential for improving our quality of life and development of society, and clearly it is one of the technological achievements of our times, especially seeing that clearly in recent years. To defend against negative consequences of AI use, it's important to have a set of rules, international conventions, laws, agreements that would regulate its application and defend the interests of people. And important to know that there are a wide spectrum of threats, additional threats that AI is having, such as cyber attacks and hacking, information manipulation, mass surveillance, and privacy infringements, spreading propaganda and mass disinformation. Of course, it's important that respective measures are adapted, and the topic that many have spoken about, my colleagues, it's important not to allow mass blocking of media, that AI would not allow AI to be the filter to be deciding on this when you're talking about media, independent bloggers. When a person is becoming, I would say, is becoming a victim of a machine that is following some system in some platform.
We do not have any illusions about large companies such as Google and a number of other largest American companies be censoring, and the danger in this censorship is that you cannot do anything against it because you don't have any facts. And we encountered for a long time that illegal blocking of certain independent meaning of or viewpoint of journalists. When you are trying to go to protest in the USA, for example, in the Association for Protection of Journalists, which unfortunately do not respond, because it is also financed by the same corporations and does not take any necessary measures. And when this happens with using the AI, then we understand that it can increase the scale and danger of this illegal censorship. It is important to pass according regular acts which will prevent the violation of freedom of speech. And an important thing is that there should be certain laws about transparency of algorithms of using automated systems, and the law on protection of privacy, international agreements on AI, on cybersecurity, and the important fact which I would like to emphasize during my speech is that we should not forget that today many of those who actively develop and implement AI systems do not understand by themselves that in the nearest future they can be fired. They must understand that there is a danger, and we can see that the number of independent journalists is decreasing because of the implementation of the AI system. In the media sphere, it is very important. And many of those who have developed this AI can understand that Kronos can eat his own children. They must understand this. I hope that we will fight for passing certain laws preventing the decrease of specialists who work in the media sphere. Certain legal acts must be passed, international acts, and then there will be internal legislation also concerning this matter. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ivan Vladimirovich. And in conclusion, I am giving the floor to a journalist, the chief editor of Anti-Spiegel, Thomas Roper, Germany. I decided to give my speech in Russian because what I want to say is more for Russians than for the West people. I have just heard from the previous speaker about beautiful words about Google, Facebook, and yes, you can complain as much as you want. You cannot complain. There is a censorship. Unfortunately, I'm pressed for time, but in brief. And it is very weird that people don't know much about that. Both Google and Meta were established by the CIA money. There are open sources who tell us how much money they get, and that's why it is quite clear why they behave like that, because any company, Coca-Cola, would love to work in China because it's a huge market. But the people from social media are working where they get money from. That is in America, CIA. Very often they ask me in Russia, how does it come that the Germans are patient with this government, they're tolerant with this government, which worsens the life of people? It is very difficult for me to explain why. Today we're speaking about censorship, and when we're sitting here in Russia and are complaining that, for example, YouTube has been closed, there are thousands of subscribers. Yes, it's a pity. In the West, the effect is different. Non-knowledge. My site is rather big. I have the bigger audience than RT. Why? Because I am not under VPN so far, but it shows how people are thirsty for the information which are not published in mainstream and West media. The problem is that they're hiding everything. Information is inaccessible. If you don't know Russian or Chinese, you cannot get the information you want. That's why I'm not speaking in Germany, that I am that a person which can give the information, and that is the problem. When there is a censorship in Western mass media, especially in social media, this cuts people off from the information to such an extent which we cannot understand here in Russia, because in Russia there is information. We can learn what American, German, or Chinese government says. In Germany, we can only learn that what Russia as if says. There is no quotation, just the explanation, for example, what Putin or Lavrov would like to say. This is just a survey that people in the West do not know. And there are a lot of examples. Maybe you remember the 2021 when there was an effort of the coup d'etat in Belarus. When in Russia they caught a person. In Germany they wrote nothing about that. It simply didn't happen. Not a single person in Germany, unless he read RT or my site, didn't know about that. And there are a lot of examples like this. Things that people just don't know. And this is the danger of censorship. Yes, we will be worried if they close our channel. Yes, because they can change their minds and try to think that Russia is our enemy and so on. But if the information were accessible there, I'm not speaking about truth or non-truth. I'm speaking about two viewpoints so that people can compare the arguments. All the problems we're encountering now will disappear. We should understand how dangerous this censorship in social media is, to understand why people behave in such way in the West and why it is so manageable. Unfortunately, Russia didn't create its own or develop its own YouTube version. Now, yes, there is RootTube, but it's not accessible everywhere. Unfortunately, USA has the upper hand in this, and it was time when I told how CIA established Google and Facebook with the aim of getting this power over the knowledge and viewpoints of people. Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas. We have 3 awards, World's Voice BRICS, and I'm going to award them right now, to hand them in. 1 award goes to Pepe Escobar, which covers multipolarity of the world, to Brazil. 2nd award, the 3rd. The 1st was handed to WikiLeaks. The 3rd award goes to Australia, to Simeon Boykov. Can we have Boykov on the screen, please? Simon, we would like to hand you in this award from the Association of BRICS Journalists for being brave, being loyal to the front. We can list your merits for a very long time, but it is a well-deserved award which goes to you. And the last award I would like to hand in to Thomas Rapper for honesty and the best analytics. This goes to you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being present here. Have a nice day and successful work. AI is not evil. The most important is to use it more wisely. Thank you.